Welcome back to the Becoming Noble podcast. Today, I have the honor of being joined by Yuri Bezmenov, who many of you will know, Substack's top comedy writer. Yuri, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Johann, and very much on the same wavelength, so look forward to talking to you.
Now, as I understand it, you're not the real Yuri Bezmenov, is that correct? Could you offer a short introduction for the audience?
Yes, that's fine. I think I'm number 15 in comedy, which is hilarious to me. I guess that's the only category that I felt at home in. My namesake Yuri Bezmenov is a legend in his own right. He was a KGB defector who came to the West in the 80s and gave a lot of speeches about this concept of ideological subversion. And he's very much like a Nostradamus figure because every step that he laid out has come into reality since he warned about it. And he passed away in 1993. I was born shortly before that and grew up in a family that had escaped from the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So my father and my grandfather were both subjected to struggle sessions, and I didn't know what that was until I went to college, where I saw a struggle session for myself. And this is something that's very commonplace now in most American campuses and cities. So I think I've lived amongst the most demoralized people that we can imagine. So I know how they think, and I started my Substack a few years ago to report from that field, ridicule it. I think the best way to subvert subversion is to use humor and comedy. And I know we've both written recently about this concept of arranged marriage and how that could potentially help turn the tide here and make our countries or civilization more pronatal and welcoming for families.
No, you're doing heroic work. There was a danger at one point that the right scene descended into extremely dry, important and accurate, but dry discussions of sort of realist political theory and so forth. So it's nice to have a meme lord amongst us.
It's nice to keep it light when we're discussing heavy topics. And I do think this battle is going to be won or lost with the normies. So to the extent that me, you, or anybody out there can make our content and our thoughts as accessible and appealing to normies as possible, the better we'll perform in the long run.
Absolutely. And so, like me, you're a married father. Am I right in that regard?
Yes, the two best things I've ever done.
Excellent. Okay, so we're just two dads chatting. Please, no persecution for whatever we say today. Just two dads shooting it with each other.
Exactly. Dad banter is the best.
Exactly. Okay, so onto the topic at hand. We've both written pieces which sort of, I think, touch lightly and perhaps slightly ironically on the term arranged marriages and indeed the necessity for the revival of the institution. I think we're probably scaring the ladies already. So do you want to maybe offer a sort of understanding of what you think of when you advocate for arranged marriages as such?
Yes. Well, I want to get the most important disclaimer up front before we scare away the ladies, as you mentioned. Arranged marriage is not about anything mandatory. We're not talking about some of the backwards, barbaric practices where a woman is forced to marry a man because their families have arranged it that way. What I mean by arranged marriage in a modern context, which I think can work within our current societies, is to bring back this tradition where a family is more involved and influential in choosing a life partner for their kids. And I think this can be pretty casual, even where, when a kid turns into a teenager, you can start to have a more, pronatal type of conversation with them. Because let's just compare that to the status quo, which is completely insane and nonsensical. You have these kids go into a high school and their teacher, who's a stranger, not related to them at all, is going to tell them all about sex, condoms, traumatize them by showing them a video of the miracle of life, the birth. I don't know if that's what happened in your education, but that's something that me and most of my peers will never forget. And then, of course, you have the demoralized LGBTQ and trans stuff layered on top of that these days. So I think what this concept of arranged marriage could evolve into is, just to have families be more conscious of leading that narrative for their kids and telling them, hey, getting married and starting a family is the most rewarding and important thing you're ever going to do. And once you turn 18, you're legally an adult. We want to make sure that you have the right mindset to do that. And it does take a few years just to date and get to know people who you might want to marry. So let's try to make that a little bit easier for you. Maybe we'll introduce you to potential matches. These are families that we know well. They're vetted. They share our values, and then let it take off from there.
Yeah, I think that's right. In the Western tradition, perhaps a term closer to curated marriages, or I was going to say assisted marriages, but as anyone British listening knows, there's something called the assisted dying bill going through Parliament at the moment, so I don't particularly want to evoke that. But
yeah, we do need a good term for this to distinguish it, because assisted doesn't sound quite good. Curated, maybe that sounds a little bit social media influencery, but yes, I think we're both getting at the same thing, where if you want to have grandkids, you should very much teach your kids that it's a rewarding thing that you should do, and focus on that younger instead of getting caught up with career, partying, etc.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're absolutely right to say the Western tradition has never been, outside of the most extreme cases, ironically, in the kind of royalty, this is who you're marrying. You don't have a say in it. You don't have a veto. It's always been, we as a family and you as an individual have needs. You have financial needs. You have social needs. You need a partner. You need a spouse. You need someone who you can build a life with. And we have relationships, we have access to institutions, we have capital, and so forth. And we want to help you along the way by connecting you with some of the right people. And that indeed comes with expectations. That's always been the balance. And it works well. And I think one of the reasons that, and I'd be curious for your thoughts on sort of why the time is now for this institution to make a comeback. But for me, it's very much that there's not just a marriage shortage or a child shortage, although there are indeed both. If you look further back upstream, you find that there is what has been called a relationship recession, which is to say that in some fundamental sense, the matchmaking and pair bonding infrastructure of society just isn't functioning. So other people have to step in to perform some kind of supportive role.
Yes, and I do think this is starting to happen organically, because I gave a speech about arranged marriage at NatalCon back in January. Shout out to Kevin Dolan and Lomez for organizing a great gathering. Everyone there was really open to new ideas, and it's great to see old friends and make new friends there. So yes, I do think we need to provide more structure. Now, it's always going to be an awkward dance with teenagers, because they're naturally going to want to rebel, but they do, of course, ultimately have veto power. It's their life, and all you're doing is getting potential mates in front of them. While I was at NatalCon, I had a really interesting conversation with a gentleman there who had adult children who were his daughters in their 20s. And he actually said that one of them proactively came to him and asked him for advice and potential matchmaking, because she got so burnt out from the dating apps. And I do think we've reached this point where dating apps have been around for over a decade, and there's so many of them, and people are not getting good feedback from it. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of loneliness, and especially in the cities, people are living very atomized lives. So if you can provide this infrastructure and guidance earlier on, before they get off to college and start working jobs and living independently, I think that's the critical period, like 18 to 25, to make this next generation understand that you'll have plenty of time to work your entire life. Don't get distracted. You only get one spouse, and hopefully, if you do it right, and from there you can raise a lot of kids that are going to give you more joy and reward than anything else on this planet can.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have in their minds, when you suggest a concept like this, that a sort of very ham-fisted, oh, here's a random friend of a friend's child, we're going to put you in a room together and hope something happens. But I don't think it has to be that unsubtle. In fact, if you look at, I wrote a piece about the Georgian marriage season. So think sort of 200 years ago in Britain. And it wasn't just putting two young people on opposite sides of the table from each other and expecting them to generate some form of chemistry because it would be socially convenient for their parents. It was a recognition that for this to function properly, the children had to take a huge amount of enjoyment from it. And therefore, it was organized around parties, celebrations. The parents were devoting significant financial capital to making sure that the children had access to, have dinner with people, host events, host parties at their houses, go out to the entertainments of the day, which was primarily opera. Obviously, it would be something else now, probably. But the point is that a lot of this is in recognizing that the demands of the job market on young people now, and men especially, in the context of the discussion we're having now, are so intense. And young people are more dispossessed than ever of property and owning property young, that you really do have to find creative ways to empower them to have a dating life, whether that's saying, hey, you can throw, a big birthday party at my house, or I'd like to subsidize your birthday party at a restaurant. You should invite lots of friends and get their friends to come. And I was sort of thinking about this idea of putting together a whole social calendar where, although you are orchestrating things as the parent, you're not micromanaging things. So you're empowering the children to have better, richer connections with the social circle that they're being starved of through the demands on their time and financial resources in the job market.
Yes, I like this idea a lot. On top of that, parents can add in wildcards, because if you only organize a party for your kids and their friends, they're going to be a lot more familiar. Whereas if you start to introduce people that they might not know, and just have this next layer of the network, like the friends of friends, I think that's where the power of loose ties can lead to romantic sparks and potential people getting married off of that. So yeah, I do think that's a really good idea. And the other point you bring up is worth reemphasizing here, which is that this was the norm up until very recently. You're talking about the aristocrats of England and France. This still was very much a mainstream way that people met their spouses up until the Industrial Revolution. And in many places, it continued on long after that. I'm thinking of my own parents. They grew up the opposite of aristocracy, pretty humble type of life in a bleak communist China. But there was this informal arranged marriage going on there because my four grandparents all worked in the same place and they all lived in the same neighborhood. So what would happen is that them and their coworkers would have social gatherings and they'd start talking about, oh, your son and my daughter, they seem like they could be a good match. They're about the same age. Let's see what happens there. So in some ways I can claim that my parents were in this quasi arranged or facilitated assisted marriage, whatever you want to call it. But this is something that most people have found to be normal up until very recently. And now I think we're swinging this pendulum back because the new progressive way of doing things is leading to complete failure. Every chart about birth rates, marriage rates, happiness, loneliness, they're all trending in the wrong direction. And I think this is one of the key pieces on reversing those trends.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. So if we were to sort of construct a causal chain here, it would be there is a birth rate crisis. There is a birth rate crisis because there is a marriage crisis. There is a marriage crisis because there is a relationship formation crisis. And there is a relationship formation crisis because there is some kind of broader social crisis in which people aren't socializing. New social groups aren't coming into contact with each other in healthy and sustained ways. The dating apps are kind of putting a thin veneer of pretense around social contact on top, but it's clearly dysfunctional. There's all kinds of decision paralysis, choice paralysis with the numbers and, how transactional the whole thing is. The fact that because no one knows anyone else, reputation is not an issue. You don't have a sort of reputation to maintain as someone of honor and integrity amongst a stable friend group. You can use and dispose of people. I think one thing you said that really resonated is that this is actually a lot of work. Like this has always been a lot of work. People have this idea now, oh, why isn't this happening? Why isn't relationship formation happening like it used to? But if you actually go back and look at how it used to work, it was a lot of effort. It was a whole societal effort towards, and you mentioned the not just the British aristocracy, but the British peasantry as well. I have a book at home. It's called Merry Old England. It's like a Victorian history book. It's fun illustrated book, and it goes through the kind of both the liturgical calendar, so the church calendar in the UK, and it says these were all the holy days, which of course implies holidays. These were the festivals, these were the fates, these were the traditions, these were, and the whole, whether it was village or town or city, would come out for parades. They would come and perform, rites of harvest and so forth. There was a full social infrastructure, and if you look through, the same is true of the Georgian marriage season, as I mentioned. But if you look at the birth rate spike in recent history in the West, everywhere from Spain to the UK, and particularly in the US in the 1950s and 60s, what you find is not just that this was some kind of religious revival leading to a birth rate spike. It was an intensification and deepening of the social fabric post World War II of a kind that is just incomparable to any kind of social activity we see today. There's a good book, which I'm sure Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, which shows the extent to which every young person, and indeed people of all generations, were going out and they were getting involved in civic institutions, in charitable institutions, in educational endeavors, in national campaigns to correct various societal issues. They were just these incredibly engaged and social people. So for me, that really is the first step. It's not just this kind of like, oh, let's skip right to the end and push people together. It's exactly as you say, in the face of a demoralized society, what are the basic building blocks of a well-functioning social fabric that we should be investigating?
Yeah, and one of the most important measures of a functioning, healthy society is its ability to reproduce and grow. And across every developed country in the West, we're below replacement. So something has gone terribly wrong there. And yeah, it's a lot of work, but at the same time, it's not rocket science. You start to feel like you're these weird scientists in a lab where like the pandas are going extinct and they just try to get the male panda and the female panda in the same room or in the same bamboo grove and hope something happens. And somehow China's been able to repopulate the pandas through a lot of controlled work. But with us, it shouldn't be so forced. I think it does just come from one family at a time making a conscious decision for their kids to have this more pronatal attitude. Because right now, when teenagers are learning this in school, it's the total opposite, right? Like, oh, getting pregnant is basically the end of your life for a young woman. And hey, we've all got to go to college, we've all got to work and party and date around in the big city. And I think we're just reaping the bad harvest from that meme. So we have to replace those memes with better ideas. And of course, I think this balls idea, we should absolutely try to do this in real life because kids like to party. They really do want to be together and have a good time with others. And if you look at in America, prom and homecoming are the two most popular events of the high school calendar. And those are dances where people get dressed up. Girls wear nice dresses, boys wear tuxes. That continues on a little bit in college, but yeah, I think that critical window of 18 to 25, if there is more of these like really coveted gatherings, and people do put in a lot of effort to make themselves look good. It's very classy. It's more formal versus going to a nightclub and everyone's just drunk and behaving very poorly. We can definitely change the culture that way.
The other thing that stands out about prom, and amusingly, I obviously went to an English school. I went to an English, what you would call a private school, and we had some pale imitation of an American prom because of the sheer soft imperial cultural dominance of America these days. We all had to dress up and pretend that prom was a real thing in the UK, which was an excruciating experience. But the good thing about that is all these things, if you actually examine them, they serve very healthy purposes. If you deconstruct them, you start to see what these are. For example, with prom, you have an explicit expectation that a boy will ask a girl to go with him to this event. And this is sort of training wheels for asking girls out, but it's asking girls out in a very safe setting where It is very clear what you're asking for. It's just to go with the boy to the prom. There are no shocking implications of this, because it is expected that the boy will ask and the girl will, hopefully accept. There are kind of gentle social pressure to do this. Everyone's acting within expectations. And so everyone feels more comfortable. Everyone has an understanding of what's unfolding. And that kind of interaction, especially if you do it in different forms again and again throughout a young person's life, you can leave them feeling very comfortable and empowered, walking up to a girl and saying, hey, I'd like to go to this event with you. And then also providing them with a calendar of safe, as you say, non-threatening events only reinforces that as they get older.
Right. Isn't there some shocking stat that a huge chunk of young men have never even asked a girl out on a date? So, yeah, that makes me wonder if proms are even happening anymore in American high schools, because it was such a dominant soft power thing, like the movies about the American high school experience. And you've got the homecoming king, prom queen, high school, like football player, jocks, and cheerleaders. All those archetypes were really, classic American icons that the rest of the world enjoyed watching the entertainment, and many of them tried to copy. It sounds like it's even gotten into the UK, which has its own very strong traditions. But yeah, nowadays, who knows what goes on, right? Like maybe they water these things down, and they, for fear of exclusion or people's feelings getting hurt, you don't have prom queens or kings. You don't have a homecoming court. You don't have valedictorians, and of course, the toxic males. You can't have a situation where they're going to randomly walk up to a girl and ask them out on a date. This is the type of stuff that we're up against, and I'm sure it's contributing to this continued erosion of pair bonding. And the most important part of the pair bond is the male initiative. The guy has to make the move. They have to ask them out on a date. So all these things are forcing the men to stay away, and I think the results are plain to see.
I remember I had a conversation with my mother, who I love very dearly, but she is very quintessentially the kind of person who gets all her information about the status of society outside of her immediate bubble from fiction, and then she'll treat that fictional information as if it was news. And she had read a book by Tom Wolfe called I Am Charlotte Simmons, which is like about the college experience in the early 2000s, and it's like very, very raucous, very sexualized. And she had internalized that as news, when of course, like, actually I said, well, I'm sure that's true of, it's obviously played up for the dramatic effect, but I'm sure that's true of a certain segment of the population. But if you look at the overall statistics about how many people have ever been with a girl, kissed a girl, asked a girl out on the date, whatever, it's shockingly low. It's really, really low. So anything you can do, I mean, this obviously goes very deep. It has to do with everything through from men's health. How fit are they? Do they have some kind of, are they obese? Do they have collapsed testosterone levels due to diet and lack of exercise, lack of sunlight? It's an incredibly complicated issue, but see, people are so delusional about it. There's this eternal refrain that, oh, we live in the most sexualized culture of all time because of hookup apps and pornography and so forth. And in a sense, that's true, but it's an incredibly brittle veneer over a deeply sexless society. It's certainly a society that's incapable of regeneration.
Maybe it was like 10 or 15 years ago, there was a feminist scholar who dared to suggest to Ivy League women that they should try to focus on finding a husband, because the 4 years that they are on that campus is the best time in their lives to meet a high value man who will be a good husband, who's going to be able to provide for a solid life and a family. And she got destroyed. I can't remember her name. That was a big flashpoint in this broader culture war of feminists want women to go to college and earn degrees and go work. But like once they leave that campus, it's the wild, wild west for them. And you're not going to have nearly that concentration of quality anywhere else you go, unless you're working at, a top investment bank or consulting firm or something like that. And then, the other issue that we face that's becoming statistically really dangerous is that the women are dominating the men on campuses now. It's like 3-2 overall, 60% to 40%. And then they go off into the workforce. And of course, they're hardwired to marry up, and they want to find a man who's earning more or more successful than them. And that's just not going to work out. That means that 1 in 3 women who graduate from college is either going to have to marry down, or they're not going to be able to find a suitable spouse. So this is another one of those things that has gotten worse over time, and you just need a reset from that high school period to say, all right, well, look, once you're 18, you can make your adult choices on what you want to do with school, what you want to do with work. But again, like you have biologically this very limited window. And from a pure logic perspective, if you want to boost the birth rate, you want to have people, pronatal families get married younger so they can start having kids younger, because it gets much harder if you want to go for more than 2 or 3 to do that if you get married at 30 versus 25.
It is so essential that we get the colleges working as they should, or the universities in the UK, because in theory, they are really a perfect nurturing space for young couples, in that women, on average, prefer to date a man who is just a few years older than them. And college is obviously a very well calibrated space in terms of that age range. So, a young woman that's entering into college, she meets guys that are a year or 2 or 3 years older than her. So that it's very well curated from that perspective. People prefer to marry within their own class. It's a sort of well attested social fact. And again, college is a fantastic sorting mechanism for class, et cetera, et cetera. And if you have student loans or a job, you have some financial resources for a social life, and you certainly have time, especially in your first year or two. To the extent that our culture, and indeed this was the reason, if you go back, 50 years plus, this was the reason that women went to college, was because it was recognized as a really excellent space to meet men. Now, this sounds like I'm just ragging on women, which isn't true. Obviously, like, a lot of men participate fully in the sort of degraded cultural institution that college or university has become. But I would encourage any young listeners, and I was surprised, I actually have a lot of young female listeners, which is not an audience I ever anticipated I'd capture in any significant way. But I double and triple tap what Yuri's saying, which is that you have to treat college not just as a means to earn a piece of paper to maybe get you a job in an incredibly strange job market, but to really be thinking in this holistic sense about all the different trajectories of your life that you're taking on.
Yeah, ultimately, at the end of your life, the diploma and the job is not going to be there at all for you. It doesn't matter. What matters is if you found a good spouse and had kids who love you. And I don't think that message gets through to young women and young men, for that matter. And they lose sight of, like, what's the point of going to college? Well, you do learn a lot of things, but what matters is the relationships that you form, both friendships and potential spouses. Yeah, I did see some people at my university get married to each other, which is great, but that was very much the aberration versus the norm. Once again, this is not something that was controversial not long ago. We have 8 Ivy League schools in America. Those are considered the top universities. And you also had, alongside them, the Seven Sisters, which are all girls' schools. And they were geographically located basically like in the same city, right near an Ivy League school, which used to be all male. So this was already a very natural, organic setup where people founded these universities side by side. The men went to one, the women went to other, and they were frequently socialized. They'd have these balls. They're not distracted day to day with co-ed campuses and all of the complications that arise from that, but they would still get together for balls and social events and a robust calendar that people look forward to. And lo and behold, many of them would end up getting married and fostering the next generation. So yeah, it sometimes just feels like we're talking about things that are so obvious and common sense, but our culture has become so degraded and subverted that these things are viewed as an old oppressive patriarchy. So yeah, it's nice to just pick up audience that you never would anticipate. Young women. I think I have a surprisingly high ratio too of just women to men, higher than I would have imagined. It's hard to hear it from us, right? Like, it's better to hear from someone like Peachy Keenan, who went through this, has 5 kids, and understands the the struggles that everyone has to go through in making these big life decisions. But as dads, we can say without a doubt that this is by far the best and most rewarding thing you can do. And that should be enough for, I think, most people to let it sink in and try to make that happen in their lives.
Definitely. No, 100%. It strikes me that the advice you're giving for matchmaking for arranged marriages, there's no reason it should be exclusive to parents. So would you encourage a sort of broader meddling amongst friends and family, aggressively setting people up on dates wherever you can?
Yeah, I certainly think that it's good to have more people advocating for you. And this is something that organically occurred at churches back when our countries were all much more God-fearing, and that was the social hub of many communities. Churches had dances. They had things. All sorts of programming for kids, where like you wouldn't even have to do much actively. As long as you went to church every week and your kids were in the schools, they would start to have that click in their heads, like, oh yeah, these are friends, and I have a crush here, and off you go, right? So yeah, if you have other friends who are playing matchmaker, or aunts or grandmas, those are all things that were well within their roles as a loved one who understands who you are, what you're looking for, and wants the best for you. So yeah, I think the more that we can have that type of network set in, the better it would be.
Definitely. I've become pretty shameless about this. I'll just I mean, only to people I know reasonably well, but I'll say, I have a friend I think you'd be great for, and I sort of do a little sales pitch, and I say, can I take you guys out for a double date with myself and my wife sometime? And it's generally very well received. I mean, especially if you frame it as a fun evening in the restaurant, have some wine or whatever. What's the worst thing that can happen? It's I think people appreciate it because they really do have like choice paralysis, and so many people have so many negative experiences on apps with people that are fundamentally untrustworthy, that having someone advocate for someone else and say, I know this person, his childhood friend, I've known him for 20 years. I promise you might not be into him, but he's a good guy and you'll have a good time, is reassuring. It feels sort of like charmingly nostalgic in a way.
Yeah, how have those double dates gone? Have you seen any successes?
Yes, I've seen some successes. I've seen some spectacular failures. Definitely at one point I got over ambitious and I set two people up. One of my friends was going to Barcelona. He's the kind of guy that he's entered into he's like too successful a bachelor for his own good. He's entered into his 30s. He's very wealthy. He works in finance. He's bought his own place, which he never fails to describe as a penthouse, which I think is a slightly generous term, but anyway, it's a nice place. And he's tall, good looking, athletic, blah blah blah. He's the full package. And he's the kind of guy that now doesn't quite know what to do with his life, so he'll take 3 weeks off a year to go to Bali to train Brazilian jiu-jitsu or whatever in the sun. And he decided to do one of these to Barcelona, and I knew a girl he'd be perfect for. And these two, they know each other pretty well. And I said, like, hey, to the girl, I said, why don't you just go visit Barcelona? You can go for a museum or something, and I can arrange for you guys to have dinner while you're out there. And I thought this was like a brilliant romantic idea. I guess I've been watching too many movies or something. But anyway, the day went horribly, and then they were stranded in Barcelona and had to avoid each other for 2 days. But
Hey,
maybe
you
don't
miss
go.
you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and the upside is infinite, right? The upside is that you just introduced people who met the love of their lives and are going to be eternally grateful for you. And the downside is, oh well, they didn't hit it off, they didn't vibe, and they'll never see each other again. So yeah, they might feel like they don't want more suggestions from you on that front, but it's not going to be anything that really ruins anybody's lives or friendships, right?
Don't worry, they'll be getting some more suggestions next time. I think my problem was I wasn't ambitious enough. But
Yeah. Well, the archetype of your friend is interesting because I know a few guys like that, and it does feel like a lot of guys are headed down this Dave Portnoy route. You know what I'm talking about? The Barstool Sports guy who's just an eternal bachelor, and all he cares about is eating pizza, drinking beer, going to tailgates like he's still in college, but he's in his 40s, and all he wants to do is party and play fantasy sports with his sports ball friends. So I think with men who are successful for sure are going to be are going to have lots of options, similar to women, right? There's just no model for them out there yet where they would want to aspire to settle down. Like I view in America, Sex and the City and Entourage as these two shows that fully demoralized a generation of women and men, because the main message of those shows is go move to the big city, hang out, party with your friends all the time, sleep around, and this is just going to be great. You can do this forever. There's no downsides to this. There's no equivalent of males and females getting married and doing a lot of fun stuff. That's usually made fun of, like in old school, right? Where the guy gets married and he's like, oh, it's a nice little Saturday. I went to Home Depot and Bed Bath and Beyond. And that's a funny joke at the expense of anyone who gets married and lives a more domesticated life. It's not aspirational. So these are the things that have very much penetrated into the psyches of most normies who consume mass media. So I think it's up to us to try to provide a better alternative. And I love what you're doing by taking this by the scruff of the neck and shoving two people together. Is say, hey, you trust me? Well, I think you might like this person. I'm trying to do more pro family type of writing or content. My friend and I launched a podcast called Call Us Daddies, which is just a banter between dads. So I think you should come on that show too, and we can talk more about our family life and all the fun and random stories that emerge from that. But the females right now, one of the top podcasts for them in America is a show called Call Her Daddy. It's this woman who made a name for herself working at Barstool Sports and being this 20-something girl sleeping around the city and like going and dating a bunch of different pro athletes and telling really depraved bedroom stories about the things that she did. And now she finally got married last year, and she got a lot of attention last year for interviewing Kamala Harris, which was a disaster, predictably. But anyways, she's now back out there going on tour. She inked an obscene amount of money on a contract for her podcast, and she just had an episode where she said that she was proud to wait to have a kid. She's like 31, I think. And she's just like, no, I legitimately was justifying this by saying that she wanted to be selfish right now. And she was crushing it so much in her career that she couldn't see herself taking a step back right now. So yeah, once again, this is the huge forces that we are trying to push back against. And hopefully we can continue to put our voices out there, show better alternatives. And in the long term, things will shift in a positive direction.
One of the things I wish I could give credit, I can't remember who posted this, but there was a big post within the last 24 hours. And what it said was that the disastrous boomer meme was you have to get it out of your system while you're young, right? So sleep around. But actually what ends up happening is you get it into your system. And I think that's absolutely true. And sorry to my friend, he listens to the podcast, but I'm going to psychoanalyze him on air as a kind of avatar of this lifestyle. It's nothing I haven't said to him before. But the problem is that when you build your life around that routine, I mean, he's extremely good at picking up girls. So, he's got the full, Tinder routine. He's very charming in person. That is a full skill set that he has built out. That is a skill set he knows how to exploit in order to like get dates, see girls, etc. The second he's in a serious relationship, suddenly he's out of his zone of familiarity. And he doesn't have all those well-built muscles about how to engage in a really sophisticated, long-term, complex, heavy relationship. And he's constantly thinking, and now I'm not really talking about him, I'm talking about this person in the abstract. One would be constantly thinking, wow, it would be so easy for me to go and pick up the next girl the second things get tough, because you're so good at it. You spent 10 years plus refining it. Likewise, his hobbies revolve around those of being a bachelor, having a bachelor schedule, having a bachelor amount of time. I have no idea what he's paying on his mortgage. It's got to be high. And I would imagine that having one or more children plus a wedding, etc., would complicate that significantly. Like all these things, these things accrete, right? So like this notion that you get it out of your system just doesn't work at all. You actually you delve deep psychological channels into your psyche instead of life expectations that family can't live up to. And I think that's very unhealthy, because I'm sure it feels great until you're in your early 30s as a woman, and maybe a bit later as a man, but not much later. And then life catches up to you quickly.
Your friend sounds a lot like friends of mine too, and it's golden handcuffs in a way, because once you go down a path where you get too accustomed to the lifestyle, and especially the free time, like, hey, I can go to a different country at the drop of a hat and go train jujitsu or go surf on a beach, go party. That stuff gets harder and harder to let go the more you do it year after year. Yeah, and I think there is something there about a lot of red pill people started in the early days of the whole concept of pickup forums. Like, hey, women don't like the nice guy. You've got to be confident. You can't just be so easy and nice and accessible, right? Like that was kind of the core themes of that. And of course, like that seeped into politics and all these other lies and propaganda that unraveled beyond that. But the whole sort of pickup orbit thing can also lead you down that path where you're so optimized and you've got an endless buffet of options. You know, any city you go to, you can just swipe on thousands and thousands of people, and you just feel like you can keep doing that forever. But we should be cautious, and it's hard, of course, as a friend to be like, hey, is this really making you happy, bro? Like is this good? And people will find all sorts of ways to rationalize, like, yeah, this is awesome, I don't want to get tied down right now, like, look at you have to change diapers all the time and you can't come out to the bar on Friday and Saturday anymore. But all these things are going to have tensions between, like, the guys who get married and are more conservative and pronatal versus the ones that just want to live their penthouse bachelor life. But yeah, I think the more these honest conversations we can have with each other, the more that we can dig into, all right, like, what's holding you back from commitment and relationship and kids? Because same as women, right? Like, at your deathbed, those are the people who are going to be there, not your sports car or whatever else it is you're into.
So, Yuri, conscious of your time, perhaps the last question from me. What advice or motivation would you give to older people who are just not sure where to get started with this, or even if they should, if it's really worth intruding in the lives of their children in this way?
Wow, that's a really good question. I find it hard to give advice. I'm just a random anon on the internet, and I'm only a few years into this fatherhood journey. So I'm nowhere near the point where I'm thinking, all right, how do I convince my own children to have grandchildren for me? But look, I think it's the most important thing. If you're an older listener and you're ruminating on this issue that your adult children are a little bit starting to drift and they're not getting settled down with the big things in life that the way that you wish they would, and they're not advancing in the way that you did at their age, I think it's important to have an open conversation about it. And of course, like, every parent and child is going to have a different relationship and sensitivity about these types of subjects, but I would just keep reemphasizing that this is the most important thing for your own personal happiness, for your kids' happiness, and continuing your family's lineage in whatever country or culture that you're in that you care about. So the future is going to belong to people who show up, and you don't want to live with regret that you could have changed the course of your kid's life in a positive direction. There's a really crazy New York Times article a couple months ago that I dissected, which talked about this growing phenomenon of grandparents who are sad because they're not going to have any grandkids. Well, I guess they're not grandparents; they're just parents of adult children whose children have told them that they're choosing not to have their own kids. The part that was really stunning in its demoralization was that each of these people, so like the parent and the child, were seeing their own therapist to talk about how they're grappling with this issue. I thought that was insane, because it's like, why can't you just have this conversation directly? Yeah, it's a really hard conversation to have, but those are the most fundamental parts of a parent-child relationship. And if you outsource this, and you're going to pay a lot of money too to these therapists, who we all know how most of therapists think and how they lean politically. They're just going to encourage bad behavior and bad choices, and they're just there to help with the rationalization stage of, okay, well, this is good because XYZ, when really it's not, and everyone's still sad because they're talking to New York Times reporters about how sad they are. So anyways, to boil it all down, you've got to do it one way or another, and it's not easy, but I think the pain and the friction that might come on the front end is going to be worth it versus avoiding it and living with regrets.
Very well said. Yeah, absolutely. In contrast to that sort of demoralization catastrophe, matchmaking can be fun. I don't think anyone has to be too heavy-handed about this. It can just be throwing parties where you invite your kids and other people's families as well. And I just can, I'd say think about the upside. The upside is boundless here. Like, of course, yes, you can get grandchildren, you can help your children make some of the most important decisions of their lives, but equally you can have a say in, who your extended family is going to be. No one wants terrible in-laws. And if you like a family, why not make them part of your own? I think that's wonderful. It helps the children stay local if they're a local family, so they're not going to move terribly far away. It gives you a stake in their life journey. I think a lot of people now struggle with becoming grandparents or convincing their parents to be present and active as grandparents because there are these like strong generational divides in terms of culture and collaboration. Everything's become very atomized. But when you lean into your children's relationship formation in that way, and then they end up having grandchildren as a result of a contribution you've made, I can't imagine anything more wonderful. And you would feel so proud. I mean, of course, you always feel proud of your grandchildren, but having that kind of participation in the process, I think would be wonderful.
Yeah, it sounds like you can start the Becoming Noble matchmaking agency. I mean, it is something fun you can do locally. And it reestablishes this intergenerational bond and this high trust bond because, yeah, I think in America, I don't know how it is in the UK and Europe, but some of these more damaging memes about families are that, number one, you shouldn't have, in-laws are annoying and you shouldn't have grandparents involved in raising grandkids. Yeah, I think that's crazy. And if you do arranged marriage, that automatically gets thrown out because you already have this high trust friendly relationship between families before there's even a wedding. A lot of times like the in-laws not going to meet the spouse until pretty late on in the process. And they'll maybe only see their grandkids, if there are any, on holidays like on Christmas or maybe one or two other times a year because they live too far apart or people are busy, they want to do other things, play golf, travel. So right, I think it's just great to hear. I'm sure next time we talk I want to hear more stories about how you're approaching different styles of matchmaking, whether it's double dates or starting to organize these bigger balls and bashes. It's good to see that these things are getting off the ground. And then the parallel universe is not just with dating apps, but like every time you take a flight, the magazine has got several advertisements on these high-end matchmakers, right? Like, hey, you're a busy executive, and that's why you're on this plane reading this magazine. You're feeling lonely, but you don't have time to date. Well, pay me like tens of thousands of dollars, and I'll get you super high-quality women in any city that you tend to spend a lot of time in. And yeah, that just seems pretty bleak, right? That the opposite of what you're trying to do. Just like it seems almost so easy. Like, hey, we've got a bunch of families that all share values, and we've got a lot of kids. We like to get together, and they're playing together. So let's watch them grow up together. And once they're of a certain age, we can have the talk about, hey, let's see how you want to approach finding a life partner and raising a happy family, and off you go.
I got told off on my Substack by one of my readers for using the term partner. I have to use spouse from now on. I think he's right. So,
Yeah,
but
I'm not
Yuri,
that into the word partner. Yeah, I think wife. I'm just trying to keep it gender neutral, but yeah, wife, husband, spouse, much better than partner. That's like a massive pet peeve of mine when I hear people use the word partner. Like, what does that mean? Like, are you at a law firm? It's such a sterile, weird word.
let's banish it from our lexicon.
Yeah.
Yuri, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great, and I think actionable, which is always nice. Where can people find you?
Yes, all about action. Yeah, I'm just Yuri Bezmenov. How to subvert subversion on Substack.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you're better known than I am, so I don't need to tell people where to go. But I'll of course link to you and so forth. Massively appreciate you coming on, and I had a great time.
Thanks, Johan. It was a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please go to becomingnoble.substack.com or click the link in the description, where you can find my best work, including over 100 essays, interviews with popular guests, and our chat, where you can talk with other excellent and like-minded people. That's becomingnoble.substack.com.